Hello, folks. This is Andrew Gilmore with another episode of Mostly Movies, Maybe Music. And we're still talking about movies today, but in a slightly different way. We're focusing on cartoons today because my guest is an expert on old cartoons, which I am too. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I'm trying. And his name is Matt Hunter, and I've known Matt for almost 30 years. And it's kind of interesting how we met because we met back in the late 90s on a message board. You remember message boards, kids? And maybe some people don't, but then we exchanged messages on an old message board called the Termite Terrace Trading Post, which was cartoon related. And we were just kids then. We were like 12 and 14 or something like that, and just kept exchanging messages with each other. And then eventually, message boards kind of went out of fashion, and Facebook came up and the whole social media thing. And everybody that we knew in that group kind of gravitated to Facebook, and we all kept in touch with each other there. So I've been Facebook friends with Matt for a long time, and all these different iterations of texting each other and social media and all that. But we've never actually met face to face and had a conversation in this way until just a moment ago. So it's taken a long time to get here, and I was always hoping that this would happen eventually. And when I said I was starting a podcast, Matt said he would come on. He volunteered to do this and subject himself to my questions. So
Well, here
we'll
we go.
see. We'll see what happens. So Matt, thank you for coming on. It's good to meet you finally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it occurred to me that I'm sure some of our friends on Facebook will be watching this, but there will also be people watching who don't know you. So why don't you just introduce yourself for a bit and tell the folks something about yourself?
Yeah, well, I am kind of I guess you'd say an amateur cartoon historian. It's kind of my hobby of sorts, and I'm from Fort Worth, Texas,
Yep.
and I just for a very young age just really loved the old cartoons, particularly the Warner Brothers stuff. I was introduced to them via Nickelodeon, and unlike a lot of people, people kind of grow out of cartoons, they say. I kind of grew into them with the Looney Tunes because to me, the older I got, the more I understood the jokes and understood the humor in them. And the more I realized just what a cultural melting pot they really were. I started really when I was a teenager, really I started reading every book I could find about them. And I just started to realize there's a whole story about the people that created them and all of that. And to me, growing up with in the late 80s, early 90s, of course we had the Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street and Pee Wee Herman and stuff like that. But after a while, you're a kid, you start looking for something more interesting. And it helped that we grew up with amazing cartoons being made then. I mean, Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, some of the Disney afternoon stuff that was really high quality. But yet the old stuff stood out to me still.
Yeah.
Um, I just thought that was still, even when I wasn't watching newer stuff, I still kept watching the Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
And alongside that, the old MGM cartoons and the Fleischer stuff and all that classic stuff just holds up.
Yeah. Well, I want to back up a little bit before we go more in depth on the cartoons. I was thinking if you want to just tell the folks something about your experiences growing up, anything about your family, things like that, just a little more background so the people know more about you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was an only child, so I was one of those people that had to kind of find ways to entertain myself, and with that, a lot of the time I was drawing a lot. I'm kind of an amateur cartoonist as well. Haven't ever made a living out of it, but I always get a kick out of drawing,
Well,
and
you're good though.
yeah, yeah. And I've never been really musically inclined. So for some reason I
Yeah.
got the visual part of it. But my parents were both very musically inclined. My dad is a guitar aficionado,
Uh-huh.
uh, very good guitar player. My mother was decent at the guitar, but she was really better as a singer. Um, but but for some reason, just the whole cartoons thing just kind of I always gravitated toward that. In addition to normal things like being growing up being a Boy Scout, I was outside all the time when I wasn't doing cartoon stuff,
Yeah,
Uh, so, um, and again, as the only child, I just kind of had to find my own ways to entertain myself. So.
yeah. Well, I know you're a big music fan. I mean, that's something we talk about all the time. So, did that come from your parents?
I think in large part because they were always playing something. We had they got a CD player before anybody had one, and they had a record player too, and they had
Yeah,
tapes. But there was always something. Like my dad was really into to folk and country stuff, so
sure.
I heard like a lot of John Prine and Bob Dylan, stuff like that. He was also into Eric Clapton, so I heard a lot of Clapton stuff. And then, of course, Beatles. They played the Beatles to death, Rolling
Yeah,
Stones, all that older stuff. And then, they were pretty hip on modern stuff too. There was some stuff that I liked, when I was growing up that maybe my parents didn't like as much, but we crossed over enough. My mom was pretty cool with it. We listened to this station called the Edge in it's based out of Dallas, and they played a lot of the 90s rock alternative stuff, Green Day, Weezer, Dave Matthews Band, that kind of stuff.
yeah. So, what was the first album you bought on your own?
The first album I bought on my own, I think, was an album. It was a self-titled album by the Presidents of the United States of America.
Yeah, I've heard of
Uh,
them. I don't know their music, but I know the
yeah,
name.
they had a song that was just really really stupid, but for some reason it caught on. It was great. It was peaches. The line was moving to the country, gonna eat a lot of peaches. I'm sure you've heard that song. If not, look
Oh,
it
yeah.
up. But just I remember that one I had. That was one of my first ones, and then I remember I had the Green Day album called Nimrod. I really liked that album too. Uh, and also one of them was actually tied to cartoons that we talked about recently. Was the Carl Stalling Project?
Yes.
Was a compilation of cues from the Warner Brothers cartoons that were sourced from the original tapes of Carl Stalling doing the scores of the cartoons.
Yeah,
I
that
listened
was
to that a lot in the background when I was doing homework and stuff.
yeah, that was very important to me. As you know, I'm a Carl Stalling freak. So, yeah, wonderful
Yeah,
stuff.
and I recently picked up the reissue of it. They put it on vinyl, and I sent you a copy too because I ended up
Yes.
with an extra. I ordered it off of eBay, and it took forever and ever and ever. And finally, I was in an actual record store and found a copy. And I said, "Well, here, I'll buy this one, and if I ever get the other one, I thought of you. I thought you're the guy." So
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I played it and it sounds great on vinyl.
it really does.
Yeah. So, just getting back to, well, cartoons and other things, because I know you have a pretty wide range of pop culture stuff that you're into. So, what else did you like on TV besides cartoons?
I watched a fair amount of MTV stuff when I was in like high school anyway. I watched it was like really stupid by that point. Like MTV had kind of passed its prime at that point, but I remember watching it. And I watched a lot of the old TV shows too, like TV Land, Nick at Night, that kind of stuff. I loved that.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think if there was a particular show that I really, really liked. I mean, I liked The Simpsons, of course.
of
That was
course.
like everybody watched that. And I remember I watched Home Improvement. I watched King of the Hill later on.
Yeah.
That was a great show. Boy, I'll tell you what. Uh, so, and I watched a lot of, documentary kind of stuff too. I really liked Ken Burns and all that stuff. So just kind of whatever.
Yeah, I know from your Facebook posts that a lot of your stuff is pop culture related, and I think you cover a pretty wide spectrum there.
hmm hmm Well, again, I grew up with parents who were really into pop culture stuff, and I remember one of the most fun times I ever had. It was my late mother was very funny, and she used to just see right through advertising. targeted advertising and even just corny stuff. And Christmas commercials just drove her up a wall because of how ridiculous they were. And we would sit there like the old men on the balcony in Muppets, sit there and just make fun of these commercials. In the kitchen, this the coffee commercial where there's an army kid comes home, the soldier comes home to his family and he turns on the coffee maker and it wakes everybody up, and everybody hugs each other. We just thought how corny that was. And my mother's line was, "Come on, it's just coffee." But we had other stuff like that, but
Yeah. So, just getting into the cartoon stuff, you were telling me you were very little when you started watching them. You said 3 or 4, so I was kind of surprised that you can remember that far back and being that young.
well, I figure that's when it was because I remember I was born in '84 and we moved into the house I grew up in '87, I guess, and that's when my parents got cable TV. And I remember Nickelodeon showing Looney Tunes, and I
Yep.
remember I was introduced to the Roadrunner and Speedy Gonzales and Bosco too. They showed a lot of the
Yep.
old black and white ones, and I enjoyed that a lot. I loved it. And then I remember there was a local TV channel that showed old cartoons that I later learned was the Turner package that they syndicated out to local channels. And then of course we got TNT as well, so I saw them there. So all the pre 1948 stuff.
Right.
Um, and then Sunday or Saturday mornings, I guess they had the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show that was on
Yeah.
ABC, along with Beetlejuice and Ghostbusters and some of that other stuff. And then they just throw Bugs Bunny in there. It was the
Yep.
best of the bunch. So
Yeah, I remember the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show, and I still have some of my VHS tapes of some of those shows.
yeah.
Yeah.
I got rid of most of my VHS tapes about, I don't know, 10 years ago. I converted them all to disc. And then and was stupid. I thought, well, who wants all the old commercials? And now I see people selling tapes from TV with old commercials and they're making bank on eBay.
Yep.
And I'm just thinking, man, I was an idiot. I just wanted the cartoons. I didn't want all the other stuff, but apparently people just get on the nostalgia trip and they want to watch, TV like it was back then.
Right.
So, but
Yes. Go ahead.
and I had I remember in terms of tapes, I had a few that I watched a lot when I was a kid. There was one that was Disney's Lady and the Tramp was my favorite Disney movie. I had that one, and I had Aladdin. Some of the more modern ones, Lion King was really big. Everybody had a copy of the Lion King. So yeah, I had that, and then I did have got this out for you. My Roadrunner tapes.
Oh,
I hung on to those just because I like the box art on them.
yeah.
They've since been restored and remastered, put on DVD. But and then there's a Sylvester and Tweety one
Yeah.
too.
Nice. Yeah, that's interesting because I still have a lot of my public domain tapes from when I was little, and even though the
Mhm.
cartoons are restored and everything, and we can see them much better than we saw them 30 years ago, but I'm still hanging on to the tapes. There's just something about seeing those crappy prints of them that we grew up with
Yeah,
that
yeah.
has
I
value.
I had a couple of those when I first got into collecting them. Collecting the cartoons. Those were the only way to see some of them.
Yeah.
They were and you were lucky if you got the original black and white versions of some of the '40s cartoons, because then you get one and it was crap. It's a redrawn one.
Yep.
And if anybody knows the history of that, some of those old cartoons were colorized back in the '60s, and they were sent to South Korea to a bunch of really discount animators, and they skipped frames on them. So you got the original soundtrack, but you got these garish colors, and it was like every other frame of animation, so it looked really weird.
Yep.
And that was the only way I saw certain cartoons, though, until black and white versions emerged. But that was how you did it back then.
Right. So when you were watching them as a kid, were there specific cartoons that you can remember that really made an impression on you?
I remember really liking the the Roadrunner cartoons. I thought they
Yeah.
really stuck out as just great. And I don't know why then in particular. I just think it was just the Carl Stallings' music and Chuck Jones's expressions. You could understand what was going on, even if the characters didn't talk at all. Um, I also really liked I liked Sylvester. I just loved anything he was in, like chasing Tweety or Speedy or Hippity Hopper. I liked him better actually against Speedy or against somebody else than I did with Tweety, but I
Yeah.
still like Sylvester cartoons. I like the black and white ones too, and I didn't realize until they took them off, for a long time what how much I was missing, you know. But I liked those too.
Yeah, you mentioned Bosco. Was that kind of confusing to you to see such a different style of cartoons compared to the other stuff?
Yeah, yeah, it kind of was because you get a late period, like a Speedy Gonzales or something that was from the 60s, and then they go back, 30 years in black and white, and you get this like Mickey Mouse like character, cavorting around in black and white cartoon land. It's like, well, wait a minute, what is this the same show?
Right.
But but I remember seeing them a lot, and one that particularly stood out to me was the one where I think it's just called Bosco at the Beach.
Yeah.
Uh, and the idea of the dog rescuing the kitten in that on the waves, I thought that was something that, you know, a lot of the more recent, I guess, modern cartoons didn't do, which was just play with the surreal aspect of animation, the kind of rubber hose aspect. I thought that was a fun cartoon.
Yeah. So then how did you go from just watching the cartoons as a kid and enjoying them just to learning the history and really studying them the way you have?
Well, I got a book, and I don't remember what holiday it was for, but or who gave it to me, but it was the That's All Folks book by Steve Schneider,
Yes.
and it was just kind of a basic history of the Warner Brothers cartoons with a lot of the original artwork in it, and it kind of broke down who the creators were, who the people behind them were, and also kind of gave little synopsis of the different characters. And I devoured that. I remember I read that and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I was probably like 12 or 13 at the time. Um, and then I got into I got Jerry Beck and Will Friedwald's book,
Yes.
The Merry Melodies. And I read both of Chuck Jones' autobiographies,
Yep.
which were I thought fascinating. Jones was a really, really good writer. In addition to being a good animator, director, he was a great writer. Those were both entertaining reads. It was Chuck Amuck and Chuck Redux is the other one.
Yep.
And I read those. And there were a couple of others. There was a Bugs Bunny book by Joe Adamson.
Oh yeah.
It's all about the history of just Bugs Bunny, and what a cultural phenomenon that character was. But I thought that was interesting. And eventually, uh, when I was a freshman year in high school, my high school was really big on research papers, um, and I just happened to have a bunch of books about these cartoons, and I also had the internet, and I thought, well, hey, why not write a paper about something that I find interesting, And I did that, and as I was doing that, I discovered the world out there of that you were talking about, the message boards on the old cartoons, the Termite Terrace Trading Post, with being one of them, John Cook's outfit.
Yep.
And I got to talking with those folks, and it was called the Trading Post because it was a message board where you could exchange information, and then you could trade tapes via the mail.
Yep.
And that was how I met you and a whole bunch of other people. But and that was just kind of like, you're talking about the early days of the internet. We really did live through the internet stone age. So it was really an interesting time. Message boards, the first form of social media.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember you reminded me I still have some VHS tapes of things that you sent me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
I don't
I
remember if I
might
sent you anything, but I know you sent me a couple of tapes.
you sent me a whole thing of Private Snafu
Oh,
cartoon.
yeah, okay.
And I think it was like one of Private Snafu and one of Bosco. But the Private Snafu was interesting because I hadn't seen them before then, and they were, of course, the World War II training films. And I remember taking that very tape to my high school at one point and showing it in our history class, and we went
Oh,
over World
great.
War II, and they went over really, really well. Everybody loved them, and they were like, "Oh, we've never seen these before." All of my fellow classmates who were, probably what 14 or 15 at the time, and we just it was a real hit with them too, and it was kind of fun to share my interest with them. So
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad I could help out then.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's only fitting. Like you're a film teacher, and
Yep.
you show movies and cartoons and stuff to people who may have never seen them before, and that's always a fun time, to be able to share that with an audience, whoever it is, more than just one or two people.
Yeah, I did a whole course on World War II cartoons years ago, and I showed all the snafu stuff.
Uh-huh.
And that was to I don't think there was anyone there who was old enough to have lived through World War II, but there were, baby boomers who came right after,
Hmm.
so
Well,
they had a different perspective on it than we would.
Well, I remember I had a cousin. He's no longer living, but when I was in high school, another one of those research papers was World War II. And he was a Navy veteran. He served in the Pacific, and he was a captain of a PT boat in World War II. And he remembered Private Snafu. He said,
Hmm.
there was the Army Navy film reel that they used to show, like on the ships. They would show this to the servicemen, and he remembered Private Snafu. And he remembered, the it was like the dumb soldier that screws up, and he's going up against Hitler, and he ends up bombing his own camp, and it was my cousin definitely remembered seeing them. So, uh,
Yeah, that's
I,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I told him how they were so hard to find these days, and he just said that's a shame. They shouldn't censor any of that stuff. So,
yeah, well, they're out now. Steve Stanchfield put them out, so there
hmm
you go.
I have the DVD of that. I need to probably
Yeah.
get the Blu-ray version, but I haven't upgraded it yet.
Oh, I didn't know there was a Blu-ray. I just have the DVD.
Yeah, there's a Blu-ray out of it that he did I think he found a couple more cartoons and then, did HD upscales of, rescans of the ones he already had. But apparently it is an upgrade, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Oh,
Yeah.
so what was the research paper that you wrote? I don't think I got that.
Well, there was I did one on the Warner Brothers cartoons, and then there was another one that I did on find somebody that was a had some experience in history, and I just said, well, I have a cousin who's a World War II veteran, and so again we touched on the cartoons in our interview that we did because hey, he remembered them, so.
Yeah. So what kind of reaction do you get from people when people find out that cartoons are your thing and you're talking to people that don't know much about old cartoons? How do people respond to that?
Well, I mean, it's not everybody's thing, but they think it's just something kind of unique about me, you know. They think it's pretty cool most of the time. I mean, when I was a kid, I got kind of, people would kind of poke at me, kind of, say you're a nerd, that kind of thing. But I think as people get older, they realize that everybody's got their own, quirky interest in something. Some people are just really into a particular sport, or some people are really into, a particular type of music or a particular, genre of movie or something like that. And so when I tell people, hey, I'm really interested in old cartoons and always have been, they think it's interesting. They don't seem to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was a kid, I got some negativity for it, but well, now I get paid to show cartoons to people, so
Right, right.
I showed
Yeah,
them.
and I think when people were kids, they were just like, oh, that's old stuff, that's old cartoons, and I liked the new stuff back then too. I mean, I watched DuckTales, and I watched Tiny Toons, and I watched Animaniacs and Darkwing Duck, and
Yeah.
all the great stuff that they made back then. That stuff holds up still. We lived in a really interesting time where the old cartoons were still around and the new cartoons were good.
Yeah,
Before that, it was the old cartoons were around and the new stuff was terrible. And then they
right.
decided, hey, we ought to make good new stuff. And I think now, I think it's there. Some of the stuff that they're making now is just terrible. I don't like the stuff on the Cartoon Network now. I can't stand some of that stuff. It's
Hmm.
too ADHD, I guess you'd call it for me. But
Yeah, I don't even really watch television anymore, so I wouldn't know. I don't know what's
yeah,
out there.
there is. You might like the Me TV Tunes channel. Have you seen that?
I don't think I get it. No, we don't get it here.
Really? Well, I hope you do soon 'cause it's good. It's all the old good stuff. Lots of Looney Tunes, lots of MGM. They even have the famous cartoons, the
Yeah,
Casper, all that. They have Popeye, Woody Woodpecker. In later stuff, they have Hanna-Barbera. They have gosh, what was the thing I saw the other day? Oh, they're getting the 80s Ninja Turtles.
uh,
Uh, and they've got Bullwinkle. They
yeah,
show a lot of
great.
Bullwinkle. Yeah, I know you're a fan of Bullwinkle.
Well, I would say I am.
Watch me pull a rabbit out of a hat.
Again?
Nothing up the sleeve. Hocus pocus presto. I'm gonna need another hat.
Well, so do I. Actually, this is new. I just got this one today.
Yeah,
So I did
that's
get another hat. See, I am Bullwinkle. That's the surprise for today's show.
yeah. Nope, nope, I don't want to. Nope. Oh,
Oh, that's a different character.
yeah, right. But that's on my hat.
Oh, I couldn't see from here. Oh,
Oh,
yeah, that is Beaky Buzzard.
it's Beaky Buzzard.
Yeah, my eyesight's not too good. I couldn't see from over here.
Oh, well, here.
Yeah, now I can see. Anyway, where were we? I've lost my train of thought.
Well, you're talking about Bullwinkle, but
Yeah,
which of course came from again the Looney Tunes. I mean, Bill Scott was of course a writer for Warner Brothers cartoons for a brief time
right.
anyway. He
We
worked
should
under
well, we
under
should
Art
exp
Davis.
we should explain to the audience that Bill Scott was the voice of Bullwinkle and was also, I think, the head writer.
He was. And I guess the thing, in a great book, by the way, that a mutual friend of ours from Australia wrote called The Moose That Roared, Keith
Keith
Scott.
Scott. Yeah,
No relation to Bill Scott, but he explains in that book that, Bill Scott didn't really know that he was going to be the voice of Bullwinkle. He had just been doing it in script readings. And everybody was like, "Oh, we thought you were going to do it." He asked, "Well, who's going to be the voice of Bullwinkle?" And we thought, "Well, you."
yeah,
So it ended up being Bullwinkle. He, but it was a writer predominantly, and of course he wrote some of or co-wrote some of the funniest cartoons that Warner Brothers ever did. The brief Art Davis unit.
yeah. I love Arthur Davis. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lull in the conversation. I have to look out for that.
Well, what else we got here? We're talking about the cartoons. What are your favorites of the Looney Tunes anyway?
Just off the top of my head, I would say The Great Piggy Bank Robbery. I think it doesn't get much better than that. Uh,
Great one.
yeah, Little Red Riding Rabbit.
Oh yeah.
Um, I guess Porky and Wacky Land.
Yep.
Uh, those would be some of the big ones just off the top of my head.
Yeah, really, the last of the dodos. Oh, I
Of
always
course,
liked that one. I remember seeing it on Nickelodeon, and they started showing the colorized version, and that was kind of weird to me. And
yeah, I remember that.
there are actually two color versions of it too, because
Right.
Freeling remade it in 1948, I think it was. It was called Doe for the Dodo, and it was
Yeah,
almost a shot redo of it.
that's
But
49. I should correct you there.
okay. Well, I don't have my Jerry Beck book right in front of me, so I apologize.
Well, you're talking to somebody who has OCD, so that you don't need the book.
There you go. Okay. And then some of my favorites off the top of my head, I really love Gee Whiz, which is one of
Oh
Chuck
yeah,
Jones Roadrunner cartoons, the one where he gets a a rocket with bike handlebars. That's really a great one, and I love how the background changes from every scene in that cartoon. They change the style of the background. I thought
Yeah.
that was really cool. I really like there's one called Daffy's Southern Exposure
Oh yeah.
by Norman McCabe. That I saw that one a lot as a kid. I really like one of my all-time favorites is a cartoon by Chuck Jones with a couple of characters that not everybody knows. It's Claude the cat and Mark Anthony, and it's called Feline Frame Up.
Yep.
If you've ever had pets, you understand that cartoon. But it's there's a master who's voiced by Robert Bruce, who was a radio actor who worked a lot on the Warner Brothers cartoons, and he's got these two pets. That's Mark Anthony, the bulldog, who has his little pet kitten, Pussyfoot, and then you've got Claude, and they're fighting for there's a big pillow, a big dog bed, and they're fighting for it. Master gets mixed up in it. I just think that's a very funny cartoon, one of the best. The timing is just perfect.
Yeah, I remember Nickelodeon used to show that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was on ABC for a while too, but I remember seeing it on Nickelodeon for the first time, I think.
Yeah, I don't
Uh,
remember seeing it on ABC, but I'll trust you on that.
you know, I saw it on Nickelodeon, but I think it was
Yeah.
on ABC for a while before that.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess you probably knew this, but we didn't have cable when I was a kid, so I used to go to my grandmother's house because she had cable, and I wasn't going there to see her, even though I loved my grandmother, but I was going to her house just to watch the cartoons on Nickelodeon.
Right, that's not a bad deal. Um, I remember I was if you remember the Nicktoons, that the
Sure.
first Nickelodeon cartoons, the it was Doug and Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy.
Yep.
And I remember watching the premiere of that, the first time they ever showed those shows. And it was it was like late August, I think it was, and I was in New Jersey actually with at a house that my grandparents rented for the summer. And my parents and all the grandparents and adults were, yucking it up over a lobster dinner downstairs, and I was upstairs watching history, really, because I mean those Nicktoons are still around today.
Yeah.
Without those, Nickelodeon wouldn't have been a big success as it was. So
Yeah. Just going back a bit, because you mentioned Robert C. Bruce, I know you got to interview him
I
towards the end of
did.
his life. So
I
how did
did.
how did that come
He
about?
well, I had a web page for a while that was a kind of a branch off of John Cook's, and I just had a couple of articles up and some pictures, but there was one that mentioned him being the narrator traditionally of a lot of the cartoons, like the Tex Avery travelogues. He was the narrator on those, and so I mentioned him in an article, and he emailed me. Uh,
Really?
he emailed me and told me a little bit about more about who he was, and I honestly wish I'd known what questions to ask him at that point, because all I really knew about him was the cartoon connection. But he explained his origins in radio. He worked for the KFWB, which was a radio station kind of on the Warner Brothers lot, next to the Termite Terrace studio, the cartoon studio that was eventually dubbed Termite Terrace. And they used the same actors and staff as they did on the radio. That's how Mel Blanc got started as well. And of course, he came from radio. So
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember. I read the interview a long time ago, but I don't remember what his responses were to your questions.
I don't really remember specifically either, but it was interesting. He talked about working with another actor that came from radio, Jack Lasculi, I believe his name was, and he
Yeah.
talked about working on an early TV project that is lost today, but it had something to do with animated comic strips, kind of an early TV cartoon that he had done some work for, and he was kind of proud of. And of course, he remembered working with Tex Avery and doing those travelogues that he was so perfect for, because he was such a deadpan voice. um, how he kept a straight face for some of those, I will never know.
Yeah.
That's why it was so perfect, was he did it straightforward.
Yeah, I was just noticing that the bottom of your face was cut off there, so maybe if you could lean back a
Oh,
little bit.
okay.
Yeah, that's better. Now we can see your whole face.
There we go.
It's the man without a mouth, ladies and gentlemen.
I think it just shifted a little bit
Yeah.
up on my
Um,
monitor.
so I'm trying to remember. I had another question. Oh, that just going back to when you were starting to read about the old cartoons and learning about them. What were the biggest revelations to you? Things that really surprised you when you learned them?
Uh, well, I'm trying to think. One of the first things was that the dialogue was recorded before the animation. That I didn't know. I assumed that they would have animated and then Mel Blanc or somebody would have dubbed it, but no, they timed it out on musical bar sheets and they did a score and voices before they ever animated it. And I thought that was really fascinating. Um, I also kind of learned, the time period that each kind of cartoon was made. I knew they were all old, but like, how to tell, hey, that's a 30s cartoon versus, hey, that was done in the 40s versus 50s versus 60s. They all kind of had a different flavor to them. And of course, they're shown all mixed in together. So
Yeah,
you're kind of like, okay, where does this go on the timeline? And by the way, this one was not originally made in color because I saw all the Porky stuff. A lot of that stuff was in color on Nickelodeon when they dropped the Bosco stuff and then they started showing the color Porky. Um, and the Nickelodeon had that done. They did a computer colorized version of I
yeah.
think it was I don't know how many they did, 60 of them or something. I'm just off the top of my head that were computer colorized. And they played them to death.
Yeah.
They played, I mean, how many times did you ever go on, watch Nickelodeon? They were showing The Village Smithy, which is a great one. But, Tex Avery did it. It was a Porky Pig cartoon, but they showed that in colorized form. Like it seemed like every day.
Hmm.
I mean, it was
I,
on every time.
I remember towards the end of Nickelodeon's run, we people on the message board were calling Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon. We called it the Porky Pig Show.
Yeah, yeah. Because well, I think it was because they had a hand in funding those
Hmm.
when they colorized them. Nickelodeon helped the Warner Brothers recoup the cost of doing them because Nickelodeon thought that showing black and white, they had a thing that kids wouldn't watch it, which is ridiculous. Of course,
Yeah,
now they're black and white stuff is on TV again, and people are of all ages are watching it, and they just know how old it is, and it just makes it all the more special. But back then, it was like everything had to be color. We have to have everything color, or kids will think it's black and white means old, and we won't watch it.
yeah, that is
So
stupid.
yeah, yeah. But now you look at them now, and it's like, whoa, these were really well done, especially restored. Um, and this, with Porky, for example, they hold up pretty well in color. Like it didn't hurt them that much. But you look at the Fleischer cartoons, like Popeye.
Yep.
When the Turner channels used to show those, I didn't like them because they were badly done in color.
Yeah, those were
Um,
really ugly. I remember
they
those.
were awful, and I just thought, man, Popeye sucks. And then I remember seeing a black and white one for the first time, and I was like, holy crap, this is really good. And those redrawn versions completely took out the photographic backgrounds that Fleischer did,
Yeah,
and they completely redrew the animation, and it looked terrible, and it was blurry, and it looked awful. But again, there was a show that the Cartoon Network used to have that when I was in high school, and it was called Late Night Black and White,
yep.
and they showed pretty much everything from that Turner library that they had the old black and white cartoons, and I was just like, wow, these are great. Why were they not showing these the rest of the time?
Yeah, because people are stupid. That's why.
Exactly. Yeah, or more importantly, TV network executives are stupid.
Well, they're people, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, the average viewer isn't stupid, but they assume that the average viewer is stupid, and they're stupid themselves. Or if you ever watched that Pinky and the Brain episode, they're repugnant.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, the brain creates this magic word that's supposed to make somebody cringe in pain. He's like you say repugnant, and the guy's pain comes back. I remember, and it was a parody of the executive at the time of like Fox Kids or WB or whatever it was. A guy named James Kellner. I remember
Right.
reading about it from somebody in the know, and they said, it was a parody of this guy. That they all the cartoonists, all the people that worked on Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain, they all hated him. They thought he was an idiot, and so they just enjoyed torturing him in the cartoon.
Well, that's funny. I'm hoping eventually I can get Tom Ruger on here and I'll have to ask him about it.
Oh, he's a great guy. I'm Facebook friends with him. They
Yeah, I
say
am too.
they say never meet your heroes, but I've quite enjoyed following him on there. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's been very nice to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Had a hand in so much of the what we were talking about better cartoons that we had growing up. You look at some of his credits, going back to Hanna-Barbera. I'll watch something on this new channel, the MeTV Tunes. They'll show a lot of the kind of like early '80s Hanna-Barbera stuff when they were trying to get a little better. And his name is all over that stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, the later Scooby-Doo and some of the more modern stuff. And then, of course, he went into Warner Brothers. He did Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, Batman. He was a huge contributor to our childhood, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course we were just talking about Freakazoid recently and
Oh
uh,
yeah, yeah,
that's another one.
yeah. I don't like sewers. They smell like poo gas.
Do you think I've said poo gas enough?
Yeah, poo gas. Yeah. It had the cop on there, Officer Cosgrove. It was,
Yeah.
Ed
Ed
Asner.
Asner. Yeah.
He's like, you know what? I need a can of hash and some coffee. Hey, Freakazoid, you want to go see a bear ride a motorcycle? Do I?
Well, I'm glad waited until I was an adult to watch that show because I think a lot of it would have been over my head as a kid.
Yeah. Well, apparently that's why it didn't last very long because
Really?
it was attracting adults. Grown-ups were watching it on Saturday mornings, and they're like, "Well, wait a minute, no, we're trying to attract kids. We want kids shows." And Freakazoid was just kind of this anything goes adult cartoon, and obviously it played better on the Cartoon Network later when it was aimed at older people, but in its initial run, it only went like two brief seasons because not because it wasn't doing well, it was just because it was doing well with the wrong demographic, from what I understand.
Yeah, I guess so. I know, I mean, college kids watched Pinky and the Brain too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That was part of the whole message board verse that I got into, with cartoon fans was because some of them, I was like high school age and some of these people were college and young, adult age, but it was huge on college campuses. Pinky and the Brain was.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I was too young to know at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember talking to a lot of them on these boards, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I'm a college student, and we all get together and watch that every afternoon." And that was a brilliant show, Pinky and the Brain,
Yeah, I
and
love
all,
that show.
all the segments from Animaniacs, but then of course Pinky and the Brain compiled those, so you got pretty much all of them. I love that show.
Yeah.
But
Did I tell you? Well, it's not important, but I might as well tell this story. Do you know about the time Maurice LaMarche wrote to me on Facebook?
no, no, I have talked to him a couple of times on Facebook, and I don't know if I'm still friends with him or not, or if he's still on there. But yeah, what did he say to you?
Well, it was when I was in college and I was a theater student. I guess you know that. And I was feeling really discouraged because I'd auditioned for a play and I didn't get it. And everybody that was in this play they were all people that I knew. So I was feeling really crappy. Why did all my friends get in there and I didn't? And I posted something about it on Facebook. And for some reason, Maurice LaMarche saw it and he wrote me this very thoughtful message, just telling me not to give up and talking about how he'd had similar experiences in his own career. And, we've never met. He doesn't know me, but for some reason, he just saw that I was in pain and wanted to help me. So there you go.
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't realize that. That's a cool story. I mean, a lot of the times you follow those people on there and don't really hear a whole lot in terms of comments. You're just a fan.
Right.
But I mean, I've Tom Ruger's, posted on, commented on my stuff a few times, and he's a really cool guy. And I know at one point I had Rob Paulson on there. Now
Yeah.
the guy I really miss is Joe Alasky.
Yeah.
And I've told you that I got to know him pretty well.
Oh,
He
actually, I don't think I knew that.
Well, he even before the days of Facebook, he was kind of one of those guys, kind of like Robert Bruce. He emailed me, and he told me about his work, which at the time he was doing some stuff for Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones was still alive,
Yeah.
and he talked about the difference between Daffy Duck and Plucky Duck and how he did the different voices. And he said he just moved it around in his mouth. He said for Daffy Duck it with a frontal lisp, and he talked with a very frontal lisp. And then he said for Plucky it was a lateral lisp. He did it like
Right.
this instead. And that was how he differentiated the two characters. I thought that was really fascinating. And he talked about how he got his start. He started doing impressions like in nightclubs and stuff,
Yeah.
and people started realizing he was really good, and they got him. Actually, I think he said it was Bill Scott, the guy who did Bullwinkle we were talking about, discovered him, and he was a guy from New York originally, and they got him out to L.A. and that kind of started his career. And he was a really really nice guy. And he commented on stuff on Facebook all the time. He was a really sweet fella. And I he died really suddenly a few years ago. He
Yeah.
just had a sudden illness, and I guess it was just his time to go. But man, what a career he had doing, not only Mel Blanc's characters, but also his own.
Yeah.
He was something else.
Yeah. I had a little bit of interaction with him, but I had no idea that you knew him.
Yeah. I mean, again, just by email and messaging and stuff, but he was just always a very, very nice guy to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, I know a woman who dated him.
really,
Yeah.
that's cool. I
Yeah.
bet, I bet she had a hard time getting him to talk in his normal voice.
I'll have to
Because
ask
whenever
her about that.
whenever you saw him interviewed anyway, I mean, I never actually just, had a face-to-face conversation with him like you and I are now, but interviews he would always just go back and forth with his different voices. So I just thought that was kind of, I wonder what dating him might have been like. That would be interesting.
Well, she said she only dated him a couple of times, and then she met her husband and went with him. So
Uh-huh.
it was
Uh-huh.
Joe's loss, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I'm friends with his niece on Facebook. Like she's
Oh,
about our age. And she's not in the cartoon acting world at all. She's just kind of a normal, just a normal person. But she every once in a while will have an interesting post about her Uncle Joe. So she's nice, nice, nice chick. So you know.
yeah, that's cool. So I had a couple other questions, but just getting back to Looney Tunes, and I've tried to let the audience know how in depth your knowledge is about these things. So do you want to just kind of give your take on the different directors?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it really started. Of course, a lot of them were still. Well, it started in the 30s. It started with Hugh Harman and Rudy Eising and their producer Leon Schlesinger, and they were essentially trying to do, Disney but musical. They wanted to do music videos, essentially Bosco and then the early Merry Melodies, and of course, then you had a lot of people coming up with that crew, like Friz Freeling, Bob Clampett, Chuck Jones, all those guys learned.
Frank Tashlin.
Frank Tashlin, all those guys learned under that umbrella. You had Jack King for a while, who later on went on to be a Disney guy, worked on a
Yep.
lot of Donald Duck stuff. And you had Hardaway at one point, Ben Hardaway. But when it really kicked off was when Tex Avery got there,
Yep.
uh, right around 1936, and you can really tell if you watch them in chronological order just how the tide turned. They finally kind of got the idea of what they really wanted to do, which was instead of be cute or be musical, they could be funny. They could be musical too, but it was really that spark, and it was kind of Friz Freeling kind of took after Avery after he was the guy who'd been there from the very beginning, but he immediately caught on. And then of course you had Mel Blanc and Carl Stalling came along at exactly the same time,
And Treg Brown.
and Treg Brown, and it was just an explosion. Like you watch something from 1935, like something like "Pop Goes My Heart" or something like that, and then you fast forward to the fellow with the fiddle,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh wow, they're being funny here. And then you've got Porky's Duck Hunt that introduced Daffy Duck, and it just all of a sudden everything started coming together.
Yep.
Uh, and and of course you had Bob Clampett came into his own, and he took more after Tex Avery, but
Yep.
he had his own brand of just kind of wacky humor that nobody really did before or since.
Yep.
Um, Frank Tashlin, he had two stints at the studio,
Yes.
and he was more interested in doing cinematic looking cartoons, and he was later a live action director.
Yep.
He'd been a comic strip artist before that, so really multi-talented dude. But you look at some of his cartoons, like his Daffy Duck was great, like Plain Daffy, the one where he's got the Nazi seductress going
Yeah.
after him, and then there was another World War II one he did called Scrap Happy Daffy,
Yep.
where he's collecting junk for the World War II effort. I always liked that one.
You reminded me of Porky Pig's Feet. That's another one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, yeah. Ouch, ooh, ouch, oh, 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 oh. Push the hotel manager down the stairs. And I love the look on I think it's Porky when he sees the guy falling down the stairs and this little eyeball follows along.
Yep.
Uh, or when the guy slaps Daffy and it leaves a print of the glove on his face.
Yep.
But that was just a really clever bit. That whole cartoon is great.
I love it. Yeah.
Um,
So anyway, we were on directors.
and then that was Tashlin, of course, and then you have, of course, Friz Freeling was great. He was all about the timing
Yes.
and musical timing because he did everything on musical bar sheets. So he timed out all the comedy, and his deal was he had grown up watching, like all of them did, I guess, silent comedy, things like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that. And he knew that physically, even without dialogue, you had to have good timing, physical timing, and
Yep.
he was an expert at that, mixing it with music. So you get stuff like Back Alley Uproar
Yes.
with Sylvester singing on the fence and driving Elmer Fudd crazy. Or, like you said, Little Red Riding Rabbit is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Hey, Grandma. Or another great one was a later one he did called the Three Little Bops.
Oh, sure.
It's the Three Little Pigs, but in a jazz club. I
Yeah.
thought that was a great one. I mean, Frizz is great, and then Chuck Jones, one of my favorites. It's gotten to the point where I'm kind of a fan of all of them equally, to be
Yeah.
honest. But Jones was kind of the intellectual of the group, I guess you'd call him. And he got really, along with Mike Maltese, who was his principal writer, he got really into the heads of the characters. And he was the one who realized that, Daffy Duck could be more interesting than just bouncing on his head and being wacky all the time.
Yeah.
And so he made Daffy kind of a jealous and greedy character. But before that, I think Freeling was the one who really made him that way. But Jones went with it
Right.
uh, more than the others did. Then you have Art Davis, who was only there for a couple of years as a director. I think everything he did was funny, and then he went back to animate for Friz Freeling for the rest of the run, like well into the '60s.
Right.
Uh, then I'm trying to think who else. McKimson,
Oh,
of
McCabe.
course.
Oh, McKimson. Right. Is important.
Yeah, who I'll say created Foghorn Leghorn, son. And Tasmanian Devil, what for you bury me in cold, cold ground? Hurts my voice after talking on the phone all day. Um, my job, but yeah, and McKimson was interesting because a lot of people think he wasn't as good as some of the others, but honestly, his best cartoons are as good as anything that the other guys did.
Well, at least
Uh,
the first 5 years or so are
yeah,
great.
yeah, he just didn't live as long, and he wasn't around to toot his own horn,
Yeah.
and I don't think he would have anyway. Apparently, he was a very soft-spoken guy, who ironically made loud, boisterous characters. I mean, you've got, look at what he came up with: Foghorn Leghorn, Taz, Speedy Gonzales. I mean, just these outrageously, wild characters, and he was supposedly a really quiet guy that was, for lack of a better word, he kind of got pushed around, I think, by the other guys,
Yeah.
but he was good.
Living through
Uh,
the characters, I guess.
yeah, well, Bugs Bunny, of course, was the main guy. That was the guy that made him a hit. But before that, of course, you had a Porky. Porky was their first real star after Bosco. Of course, I think people sell Bosco short because Bosco was not only was he kind of a racial stereotype,
Yeah.
innocent one, but he was a minstrel. He was a blackface stereotype of sorts. They called him an ink spot, and that's really what he was, but characteristics of both Mickey Mouse and old time vaudeville minstrels, which is now considered very racist.
Yeah.
Uh, and then you had Buddy, who was kind of their replacement for that. Bob Clampett called that character Bosco in whiteface. And Buddy, the thing with that is that there were, probably 25 of those cartoons in the span of like 5 years, and they couldn't figure out who he was. They
Yeah.
couldn't, they couldn't define him. Like in one cartoon, he was a little boy, and the next he was kind of a little, Pee Wee Herman kind of imp sort of character, and then in another one, he was a little boy again. They never could define his age or his personality or anything about him. And they didn't like him, and that's how they got Porky. Freeling came up with Porky as part of a schoolyard group that were kind of like the Little Rascals.
Yeah.
And they thought that the pig that wore no pants and stuttered was was where to go with it. Um, and so you had Porky and then Daffy. Of course, Daffy came because he was a crazy duck that Porky went hunting in a Tex Avery cartoon. And he kind of stole the show. And then Clampett, Bob Clampett, kind of took him from Tex Avery and developed him from there, and then on and on down the line to Chuck Jones and the rest. Then I guess after Daffy, you had Elmer Fudd.
Yeah.
Elmer Fudd came from a character that I guess they're now saying was really two different characters. It's just that nobody told the animators. The marketing people thought that Elmer and Egghead were like brothers, I think, and but there really wasn't a whole lot of difference between them. It's just one of them had a well, they both had egg-shaped heads, but one of them was kind of like comedian Joe Penner, you know,
Yeah.
where it was like, "Want to buy a duck?" It's amazing. I still don't believe it. Uh, and then there was another one who was largely silent, and he just would walk through the picture and carry a violin case. People would be like, what's up with this guy? Why does he keep walking across the screen? And then he would be the end gag in some way or another. And that
Right.
was that was supposedly Elmer, and the other guy was Egghead, but they mixed him up in a couple of them, so the voice was different. It's like, okay. But Chuck Jones took that design of the guy with the derby hat and the popped collar, and he kind of came up with this Elmer Fudd, based on a voice that Arthur Q. Bryan did on the
Yeah.
radio, and he would mix up his L's and R's. So he's like, I'm hunting wabbits, be very, very quiet. And that, you know, became Elmer Fudd. And then, of course, Tex Avery took him and made him a hunter for sure, a wild hare, and introduced
Yeah.
Bugs Bunny. What's up, Doc? And after Bugs, I guess it was the biggest characters were characters that were adversaries to bugs. I mean, you had Yosemite Sam, that was
Right.
Friz Freeling. Fragging varmint. That really Mel Blanc wasn't kidding when he said that hurt his voice. He would, Mel Blanc would do Yosemite Sam's lines last when he
Oh,
was
I
in a
can
recording
imagine.
session because he said it hurt his throat and he'd have to take a day or two off. And you were talking about Maurice LaMarche, who wrote to you. He did Yosemite Sam for a number of years in the
Right.
in the 90s, and he finally retired from doing it because he said it. He would have to take 2 or 3 days off after recording Sam for just to rest his voice because it hurt. Uh,
Well, I would think it would.
yeah, it's brutal. Um, so Yosemite Sam, and then of course Tweety. Tweety came because of Bob Clampett. Bob Clampett came up with this little baby bird that was kind of like a Wed Skelton, the mean little kid.
Yep.
But and he would put Clampett was a radio fan, so pretty
Hey, big
much
time.
anything you saw him do was inspired by characters on the radio that he saw or heard. He was a cultural encyclopedia, kind of like Chuck Jones was. I mean, he just had all
Yeah.
this stuff in his head. He watched the cartoon book review. You'll see what I mean.
Yep.
We got a thunderstorm going on here.
Oh, I thought something sounded weird.
Yeah, yeah, we got a little bit of the rain coming in, it sounds like. But yeah, so Tweety, and then there was the famous story, of course, about how Friz Freeling wanted to pair Tweety with his Sylvester that he'd come up with the same year. And Clampett originally had wanted to do it. There are actually some storyboards out there that show that Clampett really did start that. And around the same time Clampett left the studio, they got a new producer. And it was a guy named Ed Selzer who replaced
Yep.
Leon Schlesinger. And Selzer was apparently a little bit difficult to work with. And Freeling had been there long before this guy, but this guy got on a power trip and he said, I want you to use this woodpecker character that had been in a previous Sylvester cartoon. And Freeling said, no, I think I like Clampett's Tweety. I think I want to do it with him. Put Sylvester with Tweety. And Seltzer said, no, you got to use the woodpecker. Uh, and Frisch said, okay, you know better than I do, and handed him the pencil and went home. And I'm like, this day and age, you can't really tell a boss off like that. But Freeling was just such that he could. And Seltzer called him back the next day and said, fine, do it your way. And it won an Oscar, which I
Oh,
always thought was a great story.
I'd forgotten that it won an Oscar, but yeah, that is a good
Yeah.
punchline.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it my way, and we'll get the Academy Award for it.
Right.
And of course, you had Foghorn Leghorn, who was the original star was supposed to be the Chicken Hawk, be Henry Hawk,
Right.
but I'm a chicken hawk, but he didn't catch on, and Foghorn did. Foghorn was also based on radio characters. And
Yep.
speaking of Keith Scott, you ought to look up his article about the origins of Foghorn Leghorn,
Yeah, I've read it.
because there were a couple of different prominent radio voices that Mel Blanc kind of meshed together and came up with this it was a Southern sheriff and it was a senator on another show, and they were both Southern and kind of had these asides to the audience. um, and Blanc kind of combined the two of them, and came up with Foghorn Leghorn. I always liked the line, that boy's about as sharp as a bowling ball. A little bit of lightning.
Hmm.
And then what that I'll say that dog's lower than a snake full of buckshot.
Well, I would think you would like the line about the highway between Fort Worth and Dallas.
Right. Well, that gal reminds me of the highway between Fort Worth and Dallas. No curves.
I just
Yeah,
assumed that was your favorite.
that was a funny one. Yeah. I like I also like pay attention, boy. I'm cutting, but you ain't bleeding. Um, Foghorn, and then of course Roadrunner and Coyote were always my favorites. I
I'm
love them.
guessing. I'm guessing you're not going to do impressions of them.
Well, when Wile E. Coyote talked, he was a Wile E. Coyote, genius. A super genius. I like the way that rolls off. Wile E. Coyote, super genius. And then we've got the Roadrunner that was just a sound effect that Paul Julian, if you wanted to tie it to the rest of the studio, he was a background painter for his Freeling. And it was the story goes that Chuck Jones and Mike Maltese were working on the first Roadrunner cartoon, but they couldn't figure out exactly what the Roadrunner would sound like. Because a real life Roadrunner, of course, doesn't really make much of a noise. I mean, they make up like a bird squawk kind of noise if they make anything at all, but they said, it needed to be something unique. And Paul Julian was walking down a hallway with an armload of artwork. And he was telling people to get out of the way. And he was imitating like a horn, like meep, 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 meep. And Chuck Jones just said, that's it, and they got him in to record that. And every Roadrunner cartoon that you see was from that one or two recording sessions that they got with Paul Julian.
Right.
It was all, they got him to record enough of it that, enough variations of it that they just used it on and on and on well into, long after he was gone. And then he had a little tongue flip, that little noise.
Yeah,
That was somebody's wet thumb in a Coke bottle.
that's what I've heard.
Yeah, they got it right up to a microphone, and somebody had a damp thumb, and it was like boom, 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 boom on the top of a Coke bottle.
Yep.
So I thought that was cool about that. I'm trying to think. After Roadrunner, I guess their biggest, newer thing was Speedy Gonzales. Of course, Speedy Gonzales is
See,
back in the house in Mexico. If you do
see,
not put my friends back where you got him, I will take them back. Um, the fastest mouse in all Mexico. Who was also one of my favorites. I love Speedy. To the point that, if we go back to the early days of the message boards and stuff, there was for a while after Nickelodeon dropped their Looney Tunes show, Cartoon Network got the exclusive rights to all of them, and Ted Turner decided that Speedy Gonzales was offensive to Latinos and decided I'm not going to show Speedy Gonzales cartoons anymore. And people started noticing, hey, how come we don't ever see Speedy anymore? And so somebody, I can't remember if it was me or who it was, emailed the spokespeople for Cartoon Network, and they said no, they think he's politically incorrect. And at that point, it got around on the news cycle. People thought that was interesting, and it made the major news. And I wrote a petition. It's an online, petition saying, hey, show Speedy Gonzales. He's not offensive to anybody. It's a great cartoon. Put him back on.
mm,
And it got a couple of thousand signatures just from cartoon fans. But then there was an interest group called the LULAC, which was like the United League of Latin American Citizens, I believe is what it was, and they all got on there and they said, no, that's our character. We love this character. He represents us in a positive way. And all of a sudden the thing blew up, and the Cartoon Network was like, well, okay, well, all right, we'll back off. We'll show Speedy Gonzales. And you can now still see Speedy Gonzales, but after you know it was thousands of people, but I was the one who wrote the text on that petition.
mm.
So something people might not know about me. A little trivia.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I'm I'm part of the reason that you can still see Speedy Gonzales cartoons. They haven't been put in the dustbin of history, political incorrectness.
Well, but Pepe Le Pew has been. I don't see anyone petitioning for him.
Well, you can still they still show him. I mean, he's still on the
Mm,
MeTV still shows Pepe Le Pew. He never got banned or anything. They just didn't use him in. I think where that whole thing came about was because they didn't use him in the new Space Jam. And it was a scene that was cut for time more than it was anything else, from what I'm told. But people got the idea, oh, it must be because he's sexist or something, and people ran with that narrative. But I he again, the old cartoons are still around. So
yeah.
um, Pepe Le Pew could be really really funny, but he was a one trick pony. You
Yep.
know, he loves the pussy cat. Mwah, mwah, mwah. He thinks he is the great French lover. He was based on the Maurice Chevalier and the Charles Boyer, these old French actors.
We,
Uh, and if you've ever seen you've probably seen it because you're so into old movies, but a movie called Algiers
sure.
uh, with Boyer plays this character called Pepe Le Moco,
Yep.
who's this international, thief, but he's also like a spy and a romance, and all this, and they're like that's where Pepe came from. Um, Chuck Jones thought it would be funny to have a skunk act like that, be such a confident, romantic lead, but he's a skunk. He stinks, and everybody's terrified of him. And people read too much into it now, and they think he's a rapist or something like that. And I'm like, no, it's a cartoon skunk, and he's chasing a cat that he thinks is another skunk, and he stinks, and the cat wants to get away from him. That's just supposed to be funny. People read a little too much into it, I think, nowadays, but I can see why people think that. It's just, come on, it's
Yeah.
it's fun. It's not funny if you watch all like 14 or 15 of them in a row, like they put them on DVD, but mixed in with the others, they're pretty fun. Particularly the last one, I thought the one of my favorites as a kid was Louvre Come Back to Me.
Hmm.
They're in the French Museum, and all the paintings react to Pepe's stench.
Yeah, I
I would,
remember. So yeah, what I said on Facebook was, of course, that Pepe is the butt of the joke because he has confidence in himself for no reason, really. He thinks he's
right.
better than he is.
Yeah, he's repulsive, but he thinks he's just cock of the walk, and he stinks. He's a skunk.
Yeah,
Oh, but of course he has this demeanor about him. He's like, please excuse me, this is my first affair, so please be kind. I am shy, but I am willing. Where are you, golden girl?
So have you always done impressions? I mean, I know that's something you've been doing for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I've always just, I don't know why. I've just been able to kind of pick up on them and do them. My parents read to me a lot when I was a kid, and they would do the voices of characters and stuff. And I think maybe that's how I kind of picked up being able to do it. But I just have kind of an ear for it. I just remember my mother used to do this literally wicked impression of Margaret Hamilton,
Yeah,
the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. When she first showed that movie to me, it was, like, I was little, it was scary. That movie, parts of it, especially with the witch, are kind of scary to a kid.
yeah,
Uh, and when your mother suddenly transforms into that character and doesn't break character when doing it, it's a little bit disconcerting. But she did that, and my dad, being a Texan, of course, did a lot of great, whenever you read a Western kind of story to me, accents, and he also did a pretty good British, you know. We read, I remember him reading Treasure Island, the Robert Louis Stevenson, and he'd do these pirates voices, and I always thought that was fun. So, so yeah, I've done some voices like here and there that I've been paid to do, but most of the time it's just been for fun. Um,
did you ever think about acting or anything like that?
yeah, again, I've done some of it. It's just I'm not in the right place for it. I work full time and I live in Texas, and even with the internet now, it's everybody else does it too. There's a lot of competition.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
and it's like, you get on these different sites and try to get gigs and stuff, but there are a lot of other people doing it, and they have a lot more time to do it than I do. So
Yeah,
professionally, anyway. But Um, but yeah, I've always been able to make people laugh by doing it, and sitting
yeah,
around at a barbecue or something, do hey Matt, do this character, and if I know what it is, I could probably do a pretty good version of it.
yeah.
Um, some people really think my Beavis and Butthead are funny, like hey Beavis, pull my finger. Yeah, it sucks, Beavis, Butthead, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Or the same guy, Mike Judge, did Hank Hill from King of the Hill.
Yeah,
When I met the guy, I went up and introduced myself, and I said, "Well, hello, "Oh, Mr. Judge, I've always really enjoyed your work, and I've got this DVD here. I wouldn't mind if you'd autograph it for me." I made him laugh. He liked that. He was a very nice guy, actually. Mike Judge, who did Beavis and Butthead, King of the Hill. He was also the director of Office Space. Have you ever seen that movie? Great movie. Very funny.
I haven't seen it, but a lot of people have talked about it, so I know.
Yeah, yeah. It's a funny one. If you ever get the chance, you got to watch that one.
Yeah.
Very 90s, but still timeless at the same time.
I'm too busy watching movies from the 30s for my work.
Yeah, yeah. And you probably seen a lot more of those than I have, but the TCM kind of movies. And I have
Yeah.
I have a fair amount of, older stuff on DVD. I have there was one that you recommended, the Footlight Parade, and then
Oh,
some
yeah.
of the Busby Berkeley stuff. And I love the old Universal monsters, the old
Sure.
30s Frankenstein and Dracula and all that. I bought there was a 4K set that came out this last year, and I got that and watched it at Halloween. It was fun, like that.
Yeah. So I think we should wrap it up, but I guess my last question is that, we're talking about these cartoons that were made 80, 90 years ago, and some people might think they're just not relevant anymore or whatever. So, in your opinion, why do you think those cartoons still matter? What's important about them?
Well, they're not only are they masterpieces in terms of just, everything about them is well done. The artwork, the music, the animation in general, but also they're cultural time capsules.
Yes.
Uh, if you look at and I'll use the perfect example of Book Review. That was the Bob Clampett cartoon where Bookshop comes to life, and Daffy Duck comes off the cover of a comic book, and he imitates Danny Kaye, doing a character that Danny Kaye used to do on the radio. That was like this Russian guy with a he's got the big pompadour and the zoot suit and the whole bit, and then he scat sings. And Mel Blanc does this little scat tune as an impression of Kaye, but also it's kind of his own thing.
Yeah.
And you've got that going on, and you've got all the book references because it's a bookstore, so you've got book covers coming to life. It's references to books, which then in turn goes into historical references, and then references to musicians, references to old fairy tales because you've got the Red Riding Hood in there. It's just this all just soup of all kinds of culture, and you can watch it multiple times and still not get everything. And
Yeah.
that's just one that I think is like, if you're going to say, well, why are Looney Tunes important? That's one that I would point to, or something even as simple as the Roadrunner. It's just on one hand, it's just one character chasing another, but it's the artful way that it's done, the subtlety in some of them, and some of the best of Chuck Jones cartoons. Nobody does subtlety in cartoons anymore. You just don't see it.
Yeah.
You get wall to wall screaming is all I get out of it. And the voice actors love it because they get paid, more for the more they talk. But as Foghorn Leghorn says, that boy talks so much you get tongue sunburn. Uh, you know, you watch something like the big one on Cartoon Network now is the Teen Titans Go, which is actually a pretty funny show, but it's just wall to wall talk, and it's kind of like Chuck Jones talked about illustrated radio,
Right.
where yeah, it's funny, but you don't get the animated subtlety. But and then just in terms of just the marriage of Carl Stallings music, and then later Milt Franklin, who took over for him, and then even Bill Lava, the way these things, they were called Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies for a reason. That the music timed with the visuals is perfect. Mel Blanc is hilarious in
Yeah.
anything he did. And the other voice actors too, which again plug to Keith Scott. You got to check out his cartoon voice actors book that just came out
Yep.
this past year.
Great.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Like
That was
I
amazing.
I keep it, when I'm watching the MeTV Tunes channel, or when I'm watching some of these Blu-ray sets that come out, I'll keep it on the table next to me, and I'll like, who did that one? I always wondered who did that, and it's in there, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow, you know. Um, yeah, it was just they're just amazing cartoons, and the history of them is fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I mean, obviously, I would agree. So,
Says the guy who has, all these records behind him. So
yeah.
I need to get a shelf like that. I'm moving into a new place and I'm looking at something like that. So maybe at one point we'll do this again for something else and I'll have a wall behind me with, cool stuff as opposed to a bunch of boxes, but is what it is. So
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. It's been really fun to talk to you, Matt. Thank you.
oh, same to you. Good to finally get you face to face after all these years. About time.
Yeah, we'll do it in another 30 years.
Yeah, all right. Well, you got everything you need from me?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Take care, my friend.
All right. Well, have a good evening.
You too.